you, Mike, for the introduction and for the opportunity to come speak here. I'm not sure I can live up to that introduction, but it's a real pleasure to come back and share some memories of Cranbrook and of my time here, and to get to speak to all of you tonight. I'm going to start, and this is going to fit very well with what Mr. Linder said, but I'm going to start by telling you my 2 weird tricks for success in life. So one is to be more like a plant, which really fits with what we were talking about earlier, and the other is to get better at playing Tetris. Okay, and what I mean by that is I want to talk about growth and the ability to harvest resources and build something bigger than yourself. And second, I want to talk about adaptability and the tools and skills that come with being flexible in your environment and changing with the situation. So that's the thesis of my talk, and then I'm going to back up and zoom out from that. So let me start by saying you all deserve to be in this room, and I don't just mean the students, right? The parents too. You collectively have worked very hard. You've sweated, you've put in long nights, probably done a lot of rote memorization. If it's anything like my education, ground through some really tough homework sets that often didn't even make sense when you were doing them. You've achieved something to be here. Your family's provided support and helped you all through that process. I know that that's true of my family, and I'm sure it's true of almost every one of your families. They encouraged you when things got tough. So you all deserve to be here. And if you're anything like me, you were sitting here in these seats. I was sitting in these seats many years ago, and I was wondering, okay, I made it, now what, right? I've achieved this, what's next? What comes after this? So that was almost a quarter of a century ago, and I remember hearing a lot of people tell me a lot of advice, and so I'm going to give you some advice. And I remember people telling me about the sort of shiny future that lay ahead. It was the year 2000 after all, so it's really hard for people to avoid that topic at that time. And I don't know what the future is going to bring. I don't think anybody does. The future is always going to be new, and it's going to be different. There are always going to be challenges. But I want to tell you a little bit about what I can, what I've learned, which is essentially no one can predict the future with specificity, so don't waste your time trying. I can't tell you what I know about the future, much less what I know about what I'm going to have for lunch tomorrow. But I do know that what's coming in the future is that there's going to be a convergence between people who think in numbers and diagrams and plots, people who think in pictures, and people who think in words and metaphors. And what I mean by that is that the skills of science and engineering are going to merge with the skills of language and the skills of discourse and writing and speaking. And so to build that future, which I think you're all going to be a part of, is what I'm going to try and give you are kind of practical tools and skills that I've learned along the way in bridging those 2 areas, right? How to, think in numbers and communicate with people in that area, but also think in words and pictures. And I've done that by, interacting with lots of people. It turns out a bunch of people who won Nobel Prizes. I didn't do this on purpose. It just kind of happened. I was doing a count when I went up to the speech. It turns out I've worked in the labs of 3 different Nobel Prize winners, and then I took classes from 5 other ones, which is kind of crazy. So I've had a lot of experience interacting with people who've achieved at very high levels. People like Jennifer Doudna, who built the CRISPR system, and Carolyn Bertozzi, who invented bioorthogonal chemistry. I've worked with people who started Fortune 500 companies. And each of them have approached these problems in different ways and used different tools, but I've seen a lot of common threads between each of those individuals, and I'm going to try and distill those down into some sort of take-home lessons, essentially. And so one of those, this idea of Tetris, a friend recently told me this. He said that life is a lot like a game of Tetris. At the beginning, it's slow. You're very careful. You try to make sure all the pieces fit in just the right way. And as things pick up speed, the more flexible and adaptable you are, the easier it is to find space for what life throws your way. But eventually, you really have to figure out how to deal with the piles that come, right? That's sort of the lesson of Tetris, is things are going to pile up, and you need to figure out how to deal with those piles and how to be adaptable. So here's what I'm going to tell you in ways to kind of deal with that in life. Is to try and gather information and collect insights, as we say in science, gather data and sort of increase your N. So I'm standing before you an N of 1, and so just take that for what it stands for. These are just my opinions and ideas. They don't represent a larger message. I can't tell you that this is a universal truth. It's just my experience. So these are tools for sort of thriving in the game of Tetris. One, you are not as smart as you think you are, and that is okay. Okay, so I realize the irony of telling that to the cum laude society. So 2, gather information, collect data, get opinions, and keep learning as you go. 3, value thinking in metaphors. It's a lot more powerful than you think. 4, practice empathy wherever you can. And 5, make things and not money. And 6, try not to make very long lists. Okay, so 1, you're not the smartest person in the room, and that is okay. Learn from everybody you can. Learn from each person that knows what you don't. I think there's kind of a tough tendency in schooling and high school in general and education to rank people. You know, again, this is a place where we have this tendency to do this, who's smarter than whom. As I went out into the world, what I learned is that there isn't one type of intelligence. There's not one type of knowledge. I met people who, you know, went on to be the professors, internationally renowned mathematicians, people who are now the chip designers at NVIDIA, and they would be extremely intelligent in one area, and yet they couldn't remember to tie their shoes, right? And so I learned that each person has a multiple sets of parameters along which they can be intelligent, and that it's very important to understand that you are not going to be the smartest person for every problem, and to tap those people for their intellect, and to try and work with them rather than to try and outperform them. You're never going to be as smart as somebody who does nothing but design chips every day at chip design. And so don't even try. My friend Nate, who does this for a living, I took a class with him, and it was just impossible to keep up with him, and so I figured learn from him rather than try and compete with him. So, and it turns out that is a much more universal lesson. So, you know, oftentimes it turns out that the person with the answer to the question is not the person with the PhD, but rather the administrator, the staff member, sometimes even the janitor who had been there the longest, right? Knowledge, skill, ideation, these are all different types of intelligence, and they are all loosely correlated with one another. So we're all familiar with this idea of sort of the absent-minded genius, but you know, the counter to that is sometimes those people forget to send emails, they forget to text you, and so the person who can keep up and organize 100 different things can be equally as valuable as that person who has a really brilliant idea. So value all of those types of intellect and intelligence equally and use them appropriately. So 2, gather information, collect data, get opinions, and keep learning as you go. Okay, so you know, there's been a lot of conversation, and I think this word has kind of come to have a double meaning, but do the research, right? And I mean that in the best possible way. And that doesn't have to be doing a well-controlled, you know, high-end experiment. It can also mean talking to lots of people. So people can be sources of information. Gather as much information and data and collect opinions as you can, but then also go and dig into the primary literature. Read, you know, stories, read examples of things, go into history, find all the things that you possibly can. This is a lesson that I learned most at Cranbrook, where I was encouraged to, you know, dig into history and find out interesting subjects. Mr. Polladay had a class where he said, pick any subject from history that you want. And I decided to pick a very, very obscure person called Dennis Kearney that almost nobody has ever heard of. He was a 18th century demagogue that you know, only had one line in our history textbook, and I had to go find microfiche in the University of Michigan to find any original articles on him. And the point of this story is to say that there's always going to be more information about something, and you have to find that level of information and find what's valuable in it. Gather information wherever you can at any point in time. It's always going to be useful. So 3, thinking in metaphor. So I think all of you probably had a class in high school right now that you're wondering, when am I ever going to use this in the real world, right? For me, and probably many of you, that class was probably BC calculus. No offense, it's just probably the hard truth, right? You know, I never really had that problem. I always kind of figured I was going to use math in real life at some point. But the one that I always thought, when am I going to use this, was, you know, in sophomore year when we were studying poetry. I'm like, poetry? What is this ever good for? You know, and I was dead wrong. So I thought, what am I going to use metaphors for in life? And I was so wrong about this. So I want to share 2 metaphors and then tell you how we use metaphors in science and how powerful they are at understanding the world. So, you know, the classic, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And then one that is sort of a favorite dad joke, when is a door not a door, right? When it's a jar. And this extremely powerful tool that psychologists call recategorization is actually one of the most powerful skills that humans have. It's the ability to take an object, a person, or anything and compare it against something that is generally not compared against. And this very human power is something that we explore at this school in great depth, and it's something that I learned, first in Mr. Linder's class and then in many others. And it's a superpower that only the best scientists have, to understand the world and traverse it in ways that no one else can. Many people can design experiments and build apparatuses, and many can imagine new ideas, but only the best can see the world through a different metaphor and through a different lens. And that gives them the ability to unlock a truly new discovery. So when is a piece of RNA not a piece of RNA? When it's the guide to modify DNA in the case of a CRISPR DNA modification system. And this is the insight that led to a Nobel Prize. When is a chemical reaction not a chemical reaction? When it's used to attach molecules to cells instead of an antibody. And that was the insight that led to bioorthogonal chemistry. So it's an incredibly simple tool that we use every day, but we take for granted. And we honestly don't use it enough in science. And so it's one of the best ideas that I ever came from the practice of simply reading poems and examining new ideas in these very halls. And it's one of the things that I've learned that going to Cranbrook sets me apart from a lot of other scientists that don't have that ability to recategorize things as effectively. Okay, point 4, apply empathy where you can. Also, in another way, nobody rows a ship alone. So no matter how smart you are, and you guys are all very smart, and no matter how hard you work, if you're ambitious and you want to build big things, you will need other people to help you accomplish your goal. And they will only want to help you if you understand them and you can share a goal together. So empathy is one of the most powerful tools you have for accomplishing this task. You have to understand how other people think and how they see the world in order to align your goals and bring them into coordination with each other. This lesson probably took me the longest of all of these to understand, and to be honest, it's still a pile that I deal with in my life in Tetris and not a pattern that I can fit together really well. So spend time and invest energy in understanding how to empathize with people and really truly walk in their shoes, and the reward will be that you'll have a team that you can row with together rather than trying to accomplish the hard things on your own. Point 5, use money for work, don't work for money. I realize that this is maybe a little controversial, but hear me out. This is a simplification of the principle articulated by Walt Disney, who sort of famously said, "We make money to make movies, we don't make movies to make money." And what I mean by this is not that you shouldn't seek to build great things and to gain large amounts of capital, but to do it for the purpose of building something larger than the capital itself. It's really the core tenet of how you can navigate the world as you balance between the challenges of living in a capitalistic society that wants you to do well for many people and trying to build something that is larger than yourself. And what I have found is that it's a universal truth that I've seen when I meet with people, is that those people who only do a job to make money, if they're a lawyer, a doctor, even if they're a scientist or an engineer, if they take that job to make money within 5 years or 10 years, they end up very unhappy in that role. Whereas so I would say that the pursuit of wealth for the pursuit of wealth in and of itself is ultimately unsatisfying. Some of the audience may disagree with me, that's okay. This is my N of 1, it's just a point. But what I've seen is that when people pursue an idea or they seek to build something larger than themselves, or it could be a corporation, it can be a research concept, they can mobilize huge amounts of capital, huge amounts of resources, they can gain vast amounts of wealth, and at the end of the day, they end up very happy with that outcome. And it's because they're trying to build something to make something, rather than seeking the wealth for in and of itself. So I encourage you to go out and think about that, and maybe there's a job that you're offered and things seem great, but ask yourself this question: will this job offer me money, or will it offer me the opportunity to make something, and use that as a way to differentiate yourself, differentiate options for yourself in the world. Okay, so let's wrap up. I don't want to take too long. You're probably thinking, didn't this guy say something about plants at the beginning? So I want to come back to my second weird trick, and this is just for you all tonight wondering what to do with all this information. And I want to emphasize this idea of being like a plant, and that means I want to encourage you to grow. Right now, you spent maybe the last 4 years, maybe like me, it was 12 years at this institution, however many years you've been here, soaking up information and knowledge, building out an infrastructure and scaffolding to help your roots shoot up skyward. But the interesting thing about plants is that if you've ever watched a plant grow, you put a seed in the ground, it begins to put out its roots, and the very first two little leaves that come out of the ground, right, they're almost always identical. They're called the starter leaves, right? And every plant sheds those leaves as the very first thing it does. Those leaves die off, and then the plant begins to suck up nutrients and information and grow into whatever pattern it wants. It's adaptable, it starts to gain energy and momentum, it grows and it learns from its environment, and it takes the shape that's best suited to be there. So I think you guys have been growing in this incredibly rich soil that is Cranbrook for the last few years, and now it's your chance to kind of take those starter leaves off and grow and shape yourselves into whatever you want to become. So don't worry too much about exactly what you look like at this moment. Just imagine that right now you are that starter plant. You've built all of your roots, you've built all of your infrastructure, and you're ready to take that next step and put up your shoots and adapt to the world that you're going to go out and conquer. So I'm going to look forward to all of those things that you will become. I look forward to all of the rich and varied accomplishments and achievements that you're going to have, and I want to thank you all for the opportunity to come and share my experience, my N of 1 with you, and I finally like to thank my friends and partners and colleagues who helped me to sort of stack all of these pieces, put all of this together, and accomplish all that I've been able to do, and therefore be up on the stage and talk to you tonight. Thank you so much.